Penn State fires James Franklin, and this could have a huge effect on Syracuse football. Let's break it down.
You are Locked On Syracuse, your daily podcast on the Syracuse Orange. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome into Locked On Syracuse. I'm Jackson Holzer. Thank you for making us your first listen of every single day here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We're always free and available wherever you get your podcasts, whether you're watching Locked On Syracuse right now on YouTube or you're listening on your favorite audio platform. On today's show, we'll go over Fran Brown's answer to some quarterback questions he received in his Monday press conference. And as you could probably tell if you're watching on YouTube, Rickie Collins is the starting QB against Pittsburgh. But why is he the starting quarterback? We'll break it all down later on in the show. But first, and for most of this show, we have to talk about the big news in college football, which is that James Franklin, long-tenured head coach over at Penn State, was fired on Sunday, and this could have a huge impact on Syracuse football. Fran Brown as the head coach of Syracuse. Is there maybe a connection with Penn State? We'll dive more into it later on in the show, but first, we got to talk about the main point, which is the recruiting impact this could have for Syracuse. All that and more coming up here on today's edition of Locked On Syracuse. And before we get to everything, this episode is brought to you by Mazda. Like our players, we sweat every detail because when you make every move count, pulling off the unexpected is only the beginning. Stay tuned later for highlights in this week's Moving the Game Forward. Mazda, move and be moved. So on Sunday, the Penn State Nittany Lions fired long-tenured head coach James Franklin. And before we break down what this means for Syracuse, and after all, this is a Syracuse show, let's talk about the firing just a second from a more national, broad standpoint here. And this will tie into our discussion later on with Fran Brown and Penn State. But some quick thoughts here. I think sometimes a guy just runs his course. James Franklin did a really good job at Penn State, especially with the situation that he inherited over at Penn State. He did a great job. He was there for a long time. Penn State had a lot of success with James Franklin as a head coach. But after the losses to UCLA and to Northwestern, starting Big Ten play this season 0-3, when there were preseason national championship expectations on Penn State, you combine it with the fact that James Franklin has a well-earned reputation of not being able to win the big game, sometimes it's just time for everyone to move on. And so ultimately, while it could be controversial for some, I do think that Penn State ultimately is making the right move by moving on from James Franklin. James Franklin's going to be okay. He's getting a lot of money in his buyout. He's a great head coach. He's going to land on his feet somewhere. Someone is going to hire him. He might even end up in the ACC. I'm already seeing rumors that he could be the next Virginia Tech head coach and how Virginia Tech should maybe pursue a guy like James Franklin. But overall, I think it was best for every party involved. James Franklin is out at Penn State, and Penn State is now looking for its next head coach. Now, from a Syracuse perspective, which is, I think, what most, if not all of you are tuning into this show for, we can break it all down, starting with the recruiting angle. And I think that's the angle that most of you want to go over here on today's show, because the next topic will be about maybe Fran Brown and Penn State. But let's talk about recruiting. We're already seeing the impact of this firing positively impact Syracuse on the recruiting trail. 2027 elite four-star wide receiver Khalil Taylor, I do believe he decommitted from Penn State right before James Franklin was fired, but still, it was somewhere in the time where they had lost to UCLA and they had lost to Northwestern. Somewhere in that time is when Khalil Taylor decommitted. He was seeing where the program was headed. And then, of course, James Franklin gets fired. But we're already seeing this impact Syracuse, where Khalil Taylor is going to be on campus this upcoming weekend when Syracuse takes on the Pitt Panthers. He was originally a Penn State commit, of course. But since the firing, Penn State has lost a number of very high-profile recruits. And after all, that's not unsurprising. A lot of those recruits are elite because it's Penn State. And B, James Franklin was a really good recruiter when he was at Penn State. He developed a lot of relationships with those guys. There's a reason why Penn State consistently had good teams year over year. James Franklin was a really good recruiter. He got elite athletes to play for Penn State. And now that he's gone, a lot of those athletes who built those relationships are leaving as well. In the class of 2026, you got 3-star wide receiver LeVar Keys, who is decommitted. You got 4-star wide receiver Davian Brown that is committed. And there is another 4-star player who has already publicly stated that his recruitment is back on. I'm referring to defensive back Matt Sieg, I think is how you say his name. Matt Sieg, I think. I apologize if I'm getting his name wrong. But he publicly stated on Twitter that his recruitment is back on, but he is still committed to Penn State as of right now. But, you might as well not be committed if your recruitment is still open while you're committed to a school, right? And then in 2027, it's ugly. I mean, 5-star running back, Keemon Spell, number 1 running back in the nation. He decommitted. You got 5-star offensive tackle Leighton Von Brandt, who decommitted. 4-star linebacker or defensive back Gabriel Jenkins also decommitted. And so what does this mean for Syracuse? Well, I think there is potential for Syracuse to have a big recruiting boom as a result of the James Franklin firing here. Look, every school in the country, especially the big high-profile ones, are going to be licking their chops because you're seeing 4- and 5-star talent that was previously committed elsewhere to a pretty big program in Penn State, a program where it's tough to flip guys away from. All of a sudden, they're back on the open market. Their recruitment is 100% back open. They have no longer any allegiance towards Penn State. Doesn't mean that they can't ultimately wind up back at Penn State, but they committed for James Franklin. And James Franklin is no longer with Penn State, right? And Syracuse is in a unique position for a few reasons. Number one, their proximity. They're also a Northeast program. And I know that there's other Northeast schools that are out there, Boston College and Rutgers as well. And there's other ones, obviously, in the Northeast. But if in terms of recruiting, Syracuse is right behind Penn State. In terms of Northeast recruiting, Penn State recruits the best. And then since Fran Brown has taken over, especially look at the class of 2026 for Syracuse, Syracuse is second. They're right there. So Syracuse is a Northeast program with a lot of Northeast kids that are decommitting. Fran Brown, we know, is an elite recruiter at Syracuse. That's a step in their favor, right? And because of the 5-star commitment of Calvin Russell back last summer, there's a different feel with Syracuse on the recruiting trail. Now, when they get an elite player to visit campus, it no longer seems like it's just a favor or anything like that. No, it actually seems like they have a legitimate chance of getting elite players to commit to Syracuse football. So I don't know exactly which class or how many classes this is going to impact Syracuse with. I mean, they could maybe get some players to add to its already strong 2026 class, which is borderline top 20 in the country right now. They could add some players to their 2027 recruiting class, which is already off to a pretty nice start, getting a few commitments already there, some pretty highly rated ones, top 400, 500 top guys in the country, but they're still missing that big piece like they had in the 2026 class. But hey, Syracuse, they're reportedly getting a visit with 2027 5-star running back, number 1 running back in the nation, Keemon Spell, and 2026 4-star wide receiver Davian Brown. Prior to him committing to Penn State, he had Syracuse in his top 5. So when you combine everything involved, I think Syracuse has a golden opportunity to capitalize on the recruiting trail with the firing of James Franklin. What are your thoughts? Comment in the comment section below. How many guys do you think Syracuse is going to snatch away from Penn State? I'd love your predictions in the comment section below. And hey, Syracuse to land the number one running back in the nation, I think that would be pretty cool. Now, coming up, could Fran Brown really be the next head coach of Penn State? I think it's unlikely, but we'll go over it next on Locked On Syracuse. This episode is brought to you by Mazda's Moving the Game Forward. For those who believe it's not just about playing the game, it's about redefining it. There are moments that do more than put points on the board. They move crowds, they move culture, and keep moving the game forward. Syracuse was on bye this past weekend, so you got to go back to the previous weekend when Syracuse went to SMU. And even in a loss, there was a moment that maybe had a chance at sparking a comeback. Syracuse forced a safety in the fourth quarter on SMU. And then from there, they scored a touchdown right after to make it a 2-score game. So it gave Syracuse some hope, gave Syracuse some optimism. They tried an onside kick right after. They didn't get it, but had they gotten that onside kick, which was pretty close, and a comeback happened, we would be looking at that moment of the safety and saying that's where the game turned around. When you follow what moves you, the unexpected is only the beginning. And just like there's more to every highlight, there's more to a Mazda vehicle. Mazda, move and be moved. Because Syracuse is a Northeast program, this is bound to come up. In fact, it has already been brought up. And of course, I am referring to the possibility of Fran Brown being the next head coach of Penn State. Now, I want to preface this conversation by saying this. I think it's unlikely that Fran Brown becomes the next head coach at Penn State. But let's go over it here on Locked On Syracuse right now. So USA Today, after the firing of James Franklin over at Penn State, released an article of, I believe, 9 potential head coach candidates for Penn State. And one of the coaches that USA Today listed was Fran Brown. And I'm going to read to you what USA Today had to say about Fran Brown and the possibility of Penn State choosing him. Quote, Brown, a second-year head coach at Syracuse, has limited head coaching experience, but has made a mark after taking the job in 2024. Brown was the defensive backs coach at Georgia from 2022 to 2023 after serving in a variety of roles at Temple and Baylor under Matt Rule. The Camden, New Jersey native was also at Rutgers from 2020 and 2021. Brown led Syracuse to a 10-3 record last season, and the Orange were 3-1 this year after an upset of Clemson. But with starting quarterback Steve Angeli injured in the defeat of the Tigers, Syracuse has lost 2 in a row. End quote. So that's what USA Today had to say about Fran Brown and him being a candidate for the Penn State head coaching job. Furthermore, our very own Locked On Nittany Lions host Zach Seiko put out a feeler tweet on his personal Twitter asking Penn State fans what they thought about the idea of Fran Brown being the next head coach of Penn State. And I know from chatting with him just a little bit, I'm not giving away too much of our whole conversation that we had. So shout out, Zach, if you are watching or listening to this podcast right now. He does like Fran Brown. Don't get me wrong. He does like Fran Brown, although the fan base kind of seems a little bit split on Fran Brown being the next head coach over at Penn State. Fran Brown, for what it's worth, he was asked about it at his press conference on Monday, the possibility of him being the head coach at Penn State, which he quickly shot down. And I expect nothing less from Fran Brown in his press conference on a Monday. It's game week. Syracuse is getting ready to take on the Pitt Panthers. Of course, he is going to shut that down. I mean, why is he going to go out in public and say, hey, of course I'm going to consider the possibility of becoming the next Penn State head coach? So I don't take too much stock into Fran Brown shooting it down immediately in the press conference, because that is not the time or the place to entertain the idea of taking another coaching job when you're still in the middle of this season. There's no point, right? So I commend Fran Brown for that, but that doesn't mean that if the season were to end tomorrow, that he wouldn't have any sort of interest in Penn State. It's just that right now, time and place for everything. There's no point in really thinking about it. His job is to get Syracuse ready for Pitt, not to consider leaving and going to Penn State. My thoughts on this, like I said at the very top of the segment, I think it's unlikely that Penn State fired a very good head coach in James Franklin so that they could hire Fran Brown. And I say that in a way where it might sound like I'm putting down Fran Brown, but rather I think it's because they're chasing bigger. Fran Brown is a quality candidate probably for some teams, although those teams would probably not be any more or less desirable than just staying with Syracuse. But for Penn State and what they're looking for and the coach that they have to replace, I can't see them all of a sudden pivoting to Fran Brown. It just seems very, very unlikely. You already think about some of the big names that they are chasing. Matt Rule is someone that they're definitely going after. I believe he's at Nebraska right now, and he has obviously some Penn State connections. Curt Cignetti, the head coach over at Indiana, doing a fantastic job. I think that Penn State might offer him a blank check. They might. I mean, he's the type of guy that you would want if you're Penn State. If you're firing James Franklin, well, you might want to hire the guy who has taken Indiana football to new heights, that just went into Oregon, one of the toughest places to play in the country, and won. They're so good at home that Ohio State last year didn't even beat them on their home turf. And Indiana goes into there last weekend and they won, to their credit. So Curt Cignetti, obviously, now he is the number one guy on pretty much every head coach job board, and Penn State, barring anything super unlikely, is going to be the number one team looking for a head coach. It's going to be them and probably the Florida Gators if and when James Franklin, if and when Billy Napier is fired by Florida. The reality with Fran Brown is that I think he would be a much more attractive candidate to Penn State had Steve Angeli remained healthy for Syracuse. Because as USA Today pointed out in their article, Steve Angeli goes down against Clemson, and Syracuse, since that point, has lost 2 straight. And now, if we're being realistic, Syracuse fans, it's pretty unlikely, based on what we have seen from Rickie Collins, that this team is going to find a way to split the final 6 games of the season, which is what they need to do to make a bowl in 2025. So it's a little bit unfair to Fran Brown. I understand that. But good luck selling to the Penn State fan base that just fired James Franklin on a head coach from Syracuse, which, yeah, had a great first year, but in the second year missed a bowl. I just think that that's unlikely to happen for Penn State. I think the only world in which they really consider Fran Brown, not that they won't do their homework on him, but that they really strongly consider him, is either Syracuse does manage to have a good second half of the year. I guess it's possible that they could have a good second half of the year. But it's also that they might strike out on some of their big-time targets. If Matt Rule says no, Curt Cignetti says no, a few other coaches also say no, then maybe they have to go with Fran Brown by default. Because it's not like he's a bad candidate. He's probably just not the best candidate for Penn State. Probably not even in their top 3 best candidates, if we're being honest. I do think there's an alternate universe, though, where Fran Brown could have been in that upper echelon of head coaches for Penn State. And that alternate universe is very simple. Steve Angeli remains healthy for Syracuse, and you saw what Syracuse was doing with him healthy with that upset of Clemson. Perhaps Syracuse would have contended once again in the ACC, and then Fran Brown would have had 2 very successful years at Syracuse. And he's a Northeast guy. And Steve Angeli has eligibility for 2026. He might bring Steve Angeli over to Penn State. Got to consider that, right? They would have a quarterback for next year, a proven quarterback that's really good. We see this all the time in college football. John Mateer, there's a reason why he's at Oklahoma. The reason why he's at Oklahoma was A, they paid him a lot of money, and B, they brought over his offensive coordinator to Oklahoma from Washington State. Right there, you got the connection with your coordinator, same coordinator, a lot of money, new team. In an alternate universe, Fran Brown could have done that with Steve Angeli. New team, more money, big time program, the whiteout, all that. You could sell a lot of players on Penn State. Combine that with maybe 5-star wide receiver Calvin Russell. I mean, he's committed to Syracuse because of Fran Brown. I wouldn't be surprised if he followed Fran Brown anywhere. Demetrius Samuel, the true freshman corner, recently named midseason true freshman All-American. He would probably come too. Now, I'm just speculating on that, but it's an informed speculation. It's understanding that a lot of these players have a terrific relationship with Fran Brown, and had Fran Brown had a very good season this year, had Steve Angeli really remained healthy, yeah, there was a world in which I think that this would be much, much bigger, that Fran Brown would be one of the upper echelon candidates for Penn State. But ultimately, the reality is Syracuse unlikely to make a bowl in 2025, and I just can't see Penn State hiring a head coach a year after they just missed a bowl at Syracuse. So I think the odds of Fran Brown becoming the head coach at Penn State are very low. I don't think it's impossible, but I do think it is pretty low. I think the far more likely outcome is that maybe Penn State decides to poach one or maybe several coaches from this coaching staff to add to their brand new coaching staff for 2026. What are your thoughts on it? Are you concerned at all about the possibility of Fran Brown leaving for Penn State? You already know my thoughts. I'm not really that concerned, but comment your thoughts in the comment section below. Now, coming up, we'll talk about the present day, and that is that Rickie Collins is the starting quarterback against Pitt. We'll discuss that next on Locked On Syracuse. The NFL season is here, and FanDuel has an offer that you definitely don't want to miss. Right now, new customers can bet just $5 and get $300 in bonus bets if you win. That's right, pick a bet, put down $5, and if it hits, you'll unlock $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. It makes football, watching it even more exciting when you've got a little something riding on the action, whether you're a casual fan or love diving into the stats. FanDuel makes the game day experience so much better, especially if you're a New York Jets fan. I mean, you just bet against the New York Jets as emotional insurance at this point. So what are you waiting for? Visit FanDuel.com to download the FanDuel app today and get started. Most people can't name all their financial accounts or even what they're worth, whether it's 401ks, properties, or investments. And when you don't have the full picture, you can end up leaving money on the table, and that's why there is Monarch Money. It's an all-in-one personal finance tool that brings your entire financial life together in one clean, easy-to-use interface on your laptop or your phone. Monarch is built for people with busy lives. If you put off organizing your finances, Monarch is for you. Monarch does the heavy lifting for you. You can link all your accounts in minutes, see clear data visuals, get smart categorization of your spending, and finally feel in control of your money without ever touching a spreadsheet. Don't let financial opportunities slip through the cracks. Use code LOCKEDONCollege at monarchmoney.com in your browser for half off your first year. That's 50% off your first year at monarchmoney.com with code LOCKEDONCollege. We know who is starting at quarterback for Syracuse football against the Pitt Panthers on Saturday night. Fran Brown, head coach of Syracuse, he was adamant in his Monday press conference that Rickie Collins will start for the Orange on Saturday. Quote, Rickie Collins is our quarterback. We're going to stick with Rickie. End quote, I guess, because he said that for about 15 to 20 seconds. Those were just a couple of quotes that he mentioned. Fran Brown also declined to say whether or not preserving the redshirt year of Luke Carney is factoring in his decision to play him or not play him, whether it's to start him or to potentially insert him during the game for the team to maybe find a spark on offense, which they could have maybe done against Pitt. They weren't going to do that against Duke. That was his first start, but maybe they could have done that, against SMU, where they were struggling on offense and could have said, hey, let's give Luke Carney, the true freshman, a whirl. Let's see what the true freshman has got. But he actually said, quote, I just don't want to tell you all my secrets, end quote. So I have a question for you all, ladies and gentlemen. How do you interpret that? How do you interpret, I just don't want to tell you all my secrets? Because I'll tell you how I interpret it. And feel free to comment right now in the comment section below your thoughts on it. I think Chris Carlson, who asked the question to Fran Brown about the quarterback situation, I think he got him. Oh, I think he got Fran Brown to spill the beans without actually spilling the beans. There is definitely more to this quarterback decision than just 2025. Clearly. And we went over it plenty here on Locked On Syracuse. How, hey, guys, this is not just a who gives Syracuse the absolute number one best chance to win this season. You have to factor in the long-term ramifications of making a quarterback switch. We covered it extensively here on Locked On Syracuse. Now, I do want to be fair to Fran Brown because I don't want you guys to interpret me saying all that as if I think that Fran Brown is punting the season. I don't think Fran Brown is punting the 2025 season. That is not what I think he is doing. I think that if Luke Carney was definitively better than Rickie Collins from what they have seen in practice, if he was definitively better, I do believe that they would start Luke Carney ultimately over Rickie Collins. I genuinely believe that because at the end of the day, if you're Syracuse, yes, I know Steve Angeli is hurt. Yes, you're not going to contend for an ACC championship. You're not going to make the college football playoff. And you might call a bowl meaningless, but I don't think making a bowl is meaningless, especially if you can salvage a 6-6 season after your starting quarterback went down after 4 games. I think that's actually pretty successful. And I think that would be an achievement for Syracuse to make a bowl with a backup quarterback. I think it would make Fran Brown more desirable. Speaking of Penn State, I think he would be more desirable to Penn State if he were to turn this season around and make a bowl this season, or at least get more money on his current deal with Syracuse. So Fran Brown is definitely in the business of trying to win games in 2025. And another reason why I ultimately believe this is the case is because Luke Carney, the true freshman, is currently the backup quarterback for Syracuse football, which means he's 1 snap away from playing. It is literally as simple as Rickie Collins, like we saw against Colgate, his helmet could pop off and Luke Carney has to play 1 snap. But that 1 snap, guess what? That counts as a game played. That counts towards your ability to get a free redshirt year. If Fran Brown was truly so worried about the redshirt year, well, he would have redshirt freshman Jakari Williams be the backup quarterback because he wouldn't care about it. He's already done his red shirt. Why not just make him? So no, Luke Carney is very clearly the backup quarterback of Syracuse, but Fran Brown has to weigh the risk-reward proposition that he has right now, which is what is the reward of playing Luke Carney over Rickie Collins? Does it definitively give Syracuse the best chance to win games versus the risk of Luke Carney over Rickie Collins? And it's not definitive on which quarterback gives the team the best chance to win. And you're also burning Luke Carney's redshirt year. So overall, it's not a simple solution. It's not a simple answer, which is what we've already talked about here on Locked On Syracuse, how I support the decision to stay with Rickie Collins, just like I would have supported if Fran Brown came out on Monday and said, hey, we're rolling with Luke Carney as the starting quarterback against Pitt. Or, yes, we're going to play Luke Carney against Pitt if Rickie Collins struggles. I would support that as well. So here is what it really boils down to. Since I am in the business of, you know what, decide what you want and we'll just react to it here, just get it right. You just have to make the right decision if you're Fran Brown. which is easier said than done. But I don't know what the right answer is here. I'm sure plenty of you are going to have comments in the comments section below right now what you think the solution is, whether Fran Brown's making the right call, staying with Rickie Collins, or perhaps switching to Luke Carney at some point. But for me, I don't really care what they do. You just have to get it right. It's as simple as that. Just make the correct decision. You want to go with Rickie Collins? That's fine. Be right about it. You want to switch to Luke Carney? You definitely have to be right about him because you don't want to be throwing away his redshirt year. So just make the right decision is ultimately in the camp that I am in right now. But comment your thoughts in the comments section below. I'm sure many of you have plenty of opinions about Rickie Collins being the starting quarterback this weekend against Pitt. Now, as far as what's coming up on this podcast here in the near future, tomorrow, we'll go over some early potential offseason needs for Syracuse football because Chris Carlson, who I referred to earlier on in this podcast, actually in this segment, he released a good article about different things that have gone wrong with Syracuse. And we're going to react to it here on Locked On Syracuse tomorrow. And that's going to kind of basically be setting the stage for the offseason needs for this team next season. Wednesday and Thursday, we will dedicate those days to preparation for the upcoming matchup for Syracuse football. They are still definitely in the 2025 season. They are taking on the Pitt Panthers on Saturday night. And also, I will do my best to sprinkle in a basketball segment or perhaps two segments in the next few days regarding the expectations of Syracuse basketball versus what the pundits out there are saying. A little bit of a game called expectations versus reality. Ken Palm rankings were recently released. Syracuse basketball came in at a certain level. They were at 68. I think it was the same spot they were in last year. We'll go over that, I think, at some point here on Locked On Syracuse this week. And thank you for making us your first listen today. For your second listen, you can check out the Locked On ACC podcast with Kenton Gibbs and Alex Dono. They break down the most interesting conference in college sports, from the rivalries to the championship and every game in between. Find Locked On ACC on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. I also host a solo show on Locked On ACC every Friday, so be sure to check that out as well. Folks, thank you all so much for watching. Thank you all so much for listening. If you like this podcast, be sure to hit that like button. If you really enjoy the podcast, be sure to subscribe. Tell all your friends about Locked On Syracuse, and I will see you all again soon.